Hi folks, this is John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC on a YouTube channel. On your right, you will see a chat channel. Hello, everybody. Oh, people are already getting on, to which you can contribute anything you want. Basically, the idea of the show is to present the opportunity for players like you and fans to ask questions about just about anything. We tend to talk a lot about openings, but we also can talk about history, books, strategy, advice, tips, anything about chess and the chess world. So, and you can go back and see all these shows are archived, so you can go back to see earlier shows, to see what's been said before, and what kind of style of program we have, and maybe to get information because we've covered a lot of topics. And I'll refer back to those. You can go to my Facebook page, John L. Watson, 3 words, to find the opening topics that we've talked about before. It doesn't talk about all the topics because that was kind of difficult to describe, but it does at least cover the openings with ECO codes. The best way to ask questions is to send an email to askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. You can also message me at ICC at my handle, John L. Watson. Okay, so I've got a bunch of the usual things. I've got some old questions, and I've got some things to answer, although not much from last week from the chat. Please be very open and free to asking questions on the chat. Haven't been getting quite as many questions by email anymore. One thing you can do is you can send me games. I have a game this week, and your own games, and you can get a sort of a free look at your games, and possibly that would be instructive, and we can talk about what you did right or wrong. And a lot of these games are probably going to be blitz games or online games, so they're going to be full of errors. If they're anything like mine, they might be even slightly embarrassing to show, except that we all understand that there's probably a few drop pieces at the end, and I'll probably skip that part. I'll probably just address the main part of the game where there were still serious things going on. So please feel free to send games and get a free chess lesson, as I think it says on the advertisement for the show. Okay, I don't have any questions quite yet, so let me start with things that we've been looking at. Actually, I got an odd question via an ICC message at John L. Watson, and it's, hi, I am sensing I have weaknesses related to board orientation. For example, I feel best pushing up the board, but don't feel the same way if my pieces are at the top pushing down. Is this common? Are there exercises to help? Great show. And then he continues, if I don't feel right about downward orientation, how am I to understand what my opponent might do? So that's obviously a difficult question. It's a little strange, but I think it's interesting because a lot of people have orientation. I have some orientational issues in parts of my life, and I can understand that would be very difficult. So I assume you're talking about online games, since you're talking about top to bottom. That's not an over the board. So we're talking about games, for example, on ICC or Play Chess or chess.com or whatever. And at least for the first part of the question, there's a flip function with almost every. It's called flip in ICC. If you just type flip into the box, then you'll be able to at least see from your opponent's point of view periodically. You can just keep flipping back and forth and looking. It's not much of a great solution, but that's for sort of answering the question about if you feel best pushing up the board, you can put your side of the game on that side and go back and forth. So in other words, you're not going to be playing from the wrong side of the board. But on the other hand, you asked, the second part of your question is, how can I understand what my opponent might do if I don't understand this orientation? And that's a difficult one, because the only thing I can think of is, again, that you could flip several times during the game. It's just FLIP on ICC, and I think sometimes there's just a little button you push and it flips the orientation of the pieces. But in the long run, I was thinking, well, maybe this is because you're not playing enough over-the-board chess. I think over-the-board chess would tend to, because then you really can see what your opponent's doing and think about what your opponent's doing. And I think that would translate back onto the board. And otherwise, I guess just practice. I thought it was an interesting question. It's sort of problems I have sometimes. Okay, now here's a question on the Elyekhin's defense. Oh, good. I got a question on the chat too. But let me show you something I prepared, which I thought was kind of fascinating, and a subject we haven't talked about hardly at all, which is the Elyekhin's defense. I'm not sure if we've ever address the Elyekins defense. Maybe. But so let me just show you this first before I get to John's question there. Okay, so this is the Elyekins defense, and here's the question. In the variation with knight f, with this variation right here, with knight f6, e5, knight d5, d4. Now he talks about this move. Oh, excuse me. Oh, okay. Actually, I have a bit of a issue here. I was answering the wrong question maybe, because I'm talking about this position, this move, voluntarily retreating the knight, and I imagine that transposes. Actually, a good question. I was actually asked about this right away. The only problem with that, of course, is d5. I think he meant knight b6 on the next move, because I know the person asking this question. And if not, I apologize, because I prepared an answer to the more common move. The more common move is, and quite common actually over the years, is this, although it's a real minority move. Let me just look real quickly. Interestingly, I'm reading this question now, and I'm seeing this move knight b6 right away, which is this move. That looks crazy to me, because I think you can, without any worry whatsoever, simply play d5 here. And that's extremely cramping. It's true that that's an extended center, but I think it's a very easy center to defend. We could play around with this a little bit. I don't know if anybody knows these lines on the chat. You could always, I don't think I've ever seen this. I should have looked it up on Megabase. I think the question, though, I suspect was, at least this is the way I interpreted it, and I've got a game with it, is this order. And what's the point of that order? Well, black doesn't want to allow, let's say black wants to play g6 systems probably, and he doesn't want to allow this variation, which is really a problem with g6. The way that goes is, now you can play passively with c6, but everybody every book and my own experience is that white gets a better game that way. Just castles and plays e takes d6 and puts a rook on an open file. So knight b6 is the aggressive move, and the one that usually goes with bishop g7. And then white plays back. And the problem is, if you play bishop g7 now, you run into this move knight g5. And then there's a couple moves. This is the traditional move, but white plays f4, and ever since Karpov played This Is White, black's had problems with this many, many years ago. And I have a lot of experience with this. I used to play in a chess cafe, and I played This Is Black constantly against one player who always played it as white. And, you know, I had to be honest, after a while, I never could figure out how to equalize, and it's an awkward position to play. So I don't really recommend that. So Lev Albert used to play this move, which looks a little weird because of the dark squares. And there's many ways to try and exploit that directly, playing moves like there and back and bishop g5, but none of them necessarily work that well, which is why Albert played it. This was in his US championship days. He was actually playing this kind of thing, and successfully. The problem, I think, is that this move is just too good. And you can look up the theory on this, but ultimately, I think white's doing well. It's also in my books. I think I've mentioned some lines with this sort of thing. And it just, in the end, isn't that good. So you're trying to avoid these lines when you play knight b6. But you're trying to get back into, just to show you, you're trying to get back into lines that are, for example, like, well, as if white had played, maybe c4 here and knight b6, or bishop e2, and bishop g7, and maybe castles and c4 and knight b6. So these are positions you like as black, but you want to avoid that bishop c4 line. So you play knight b6 first, hoping that your opponent will play something like bishop e2, and then you'll just get back to where you want to. Or that they'll play c4, same thing. And they will play c4 soon, probably. So that's the idea. Now, to get back to the game, this move knight b6 immediately has been called the Schmidt variation for Lothar Schmidt, who played it very often. And I found 700 games, well, more than 700 games in Megabase, and it's been used by a lot of really good grandmasters. For example, Lyuboyevich, Sakiev, Albert, I'm just listing these, Zelchich, Giamessi, and Schmidt himself, and many, many others, actually. So it's relatively respectable. Of course, it's a real minority move. And so the line that almost everybody seems to play, one of the few independent moves that people seem to play, is this. Now you can play other moves, but this is the one that seems to be the problem. The problem is to try and provoke a5, and then all the regular variations are supposed to be, or many of them are supposed to be, a little better. So that's what happens in this game, is a4. So trying to ruin just the simple development with that and castles. So in this game, black plays a5, and it's interesting. Now here's a great case of comparing. I think this is really fascinating. It's interesting to compare what computers do with human sort of reasoning, because the two moves that Komodo gives are taking, and I think e6. Let me see. And I'm sorry, and allowing g6. No, that's probably not the best. I think there's one other move that it gives as second best. Maybe it's an e6 move already. Maybe it's just e6. Yeah, I think that's right. And neither one of those moves is played in the 300 plus games, 344 games. Every single game has gone like this in Megabase, which is absolutely incredible. In other words, these two moves don't appear whatsoever. These just don't appear, which is amazing. Now the main idea, of course, of a4 is that if black plays here, white goes here, and that messes up black's pieces a lot. It forces him to retreat in a bad way, although it's not absolutely hopeless. Let me see, do I have any analysis of this? I think the best move is this. Going knight c4 just exposes you more. And then I think just this move, because you've got ideas of playing for bishop takes g7, and that's not so easy to meet. f7, excuse me. And in fact, let me just show you that. The threat, this often doesn't work for white, this particular idea, because black goes back, and then when white comes in to win the exchange, often black can just come back again and trap the knight. The problem is with this pawn on a5, there's no simple way to go b6 and bishop back. So this is actually it turns out it's just you can't get the knight back, and or if you can, it's white gets way too many other things going. So this is interesting. One of the points of a4, a5 is to make this all work. And if you can't play bishop g7 here, then you're going to have to play some compromising kind of move, because there's also e6 ideas, and this move allows bishop g5, and so that's kind of the reasoning. I'm sorry, white's move first. Sorry, there. You're threatening knight g5, and this kind of move allows bishop g5 kind of moves, if nothing else, and just creates weaknesses anyway. So that explains what's going on there. So black almost always plays a5, and as I say in the, whoops, sorry, got to get back there. And now there's tons of games in the database. White has actually scored very well. Knight c3 is not a bad move. Just sort of go like, just develop, and then after g6 you simply take this. Now if queen takes, you've got this knight b5 followed by bishop f4, and it's just really awkward. So c takes, and the problem now is, of course, that square is hanging and that square is hanging, and they usually aren't in the exact same normal position of the Elyekins. So one really cute game, I'll just show you a real cute game, went here, check, bishop d7, h4, just trying to blast around the king side. So white has space, and you can hardly stop that move, because then both of these squares are being occupied, and of course this is going to ruin your pawn structure. So white's position is way too aggressive here. He's got a very large advantage. So black has to allow h5. This was between two grandmasters, Valls and Chekhov, and black took. You can also take with the pawn for white and not have a bad game. But and now I had to allow h5, and this happened, and just attack, direct attack. You could also play queen b3, captures, bishop takes, allows f4 and bishop e3, and there's that problem again. There's that knight hanging there, and if it comes up, you're going here, and all of a sudden there's a lot of problems with pieces getting messed up, and that's very strong. So basically pawn takes is pretty much forced, and then white has this d6 move. I can't remember if he plays it immediately. Probably does, yeah. d6, and what are you going to do? It's covered by that square, and takes is threatened. Don't know if I need to go further here. Oh, I should show you that what basically happened was white got a big attack going. It was something of this nature, and they swung over to the h file, but also has active other pieces. So that was that line. I'll just continue here. You guys, straining to here. I wonder if I get closer to the microphone. Is that slightly better? Thank you for saying that. I love it when you guys talk about how it appears on that side. What happens at knight d5? It depends when knight d5. After a4, yeah, I'd have to go back a second. Maybe you could specify after which white move you're talking about. If
if you play a slow move and then you go knight d5, the knight's just kind of going to be hit again with bishop c4, for example. And you really haven't gained anything because you can't even play the move you want to play there. Even c4 might be more dangerous here, and once this knight's moved so many times. I'm not sure if that's the position you meant. Well, you must have, because you just played knight b6. So I hope that answers that. Hello, everybody. And is the sound a little better now? I'm trying to get really close. Much better. Okay, excellent. Good. Now, let me go back and just show you. Yakins defense. This is great. Now think of how many openings you don't play that would be fun to play, and things you can do on both sides. It's just too much. Everything's gotten so narrow, and especially teachers and what they're showing. I should get better at this myself. Okay, check, and that's what a lot of the top players have played. Besides this knight c3 move, knight c3, you can play other moves. It's not that great. It's not that bad. You can always play bishop g4. So the other main move, probably the main move of the variation, if there is such a thing, has been played a lot by top players, by 2400 plus kind of players. This is bishop b5 check, so maybe they've seen it before. Correspondence also. And then white comes back, and it just turns out that c6 move is not very desirable in a sense because you want to put the knight there to put more pressure here. So white's just really trying to say, hey, I've got the center, and you've got a badly placed knight, which is not always badly placed in Alyekin's defense, but here maybe it is a little bit. So in this game, and I think there's no reason to show alternatives, this is easily the best move. It's been played in many, many games. White usually captures, and black captures that way. If he captures the other way, I think he maybe has... that's an interesting question. I'm thinking maybe white just gets to the e file really quickly. But like this move first, to kick the bishop away from those squares. And then let's just castle. Well, black is getting castled here, I guess. Yeah, this is not so convincing. I guess white just has your normal space advantage. This is no big deal. I like this move knight. Knight coming into these squares sometimes is nice. Or rook e1, or bishop f4. Maybe bishop f4 first. So this is just a typical space advantage. Black doesn't have his usual Alyekin's counterplay on the center, on these squares. So, but no disaster. I mean, you could play this way as black. It's not the end of the world. For some reason, everybody always takes with it. Well, I shouldn't say always because I don't remember precisely, but people tend to take with a queen. Just to get a little more, keep this file open, maybe still hoping to go this way, or just play a solid position with that pawn. Probably preferring c6, e6 to c6, d6. Okay, so white develops, makes sense. You've got knight here in some cases, but mostly knight here, I guess. You're also ready to recapture on that square with a knight. So black checks. There's a whole bunch of games with this, but white just gets, and the check might not even be a very good move, but it's an option to playing this way. Okay, black's getting his pieces out and starting to castle, but white's just better centralized. Probably going to play knight e4 at some point, like maybe right away. And then even a move like bishop g5. Just it's sort of like a French defense or something where this pawn structure is good and black doesn't have anything to make up for it. Black usually has things that he can do against that, c5 moves, or maybe good development, and here he doesn't really have very good development. So there's some pretty good attacking chances here, and there's even the thought that later on you might go c5 or even break with d5. Nice open files. It's just nice for white. So in the game, he tries to discombobulate black's position with this check, and white simply comes back. Okay, so black's development's better, and he's thinking about throwing the knight in there. But just structurally, and also there is this problem. He hasn't got anything out over there yet. Just structurally, it just doesn't work out very well. I'm trying to remember exactly what probably black was going to do on this move, what white was going to do. I think he was going to kick him twice and then play something like knight g5 or even knight c4. Anything to cover the square soon. Knight g5 is a good move, but I think knight c4 is too. On the other hand, this might be vaguely playable for black. The way he plays it is less convincing. Just because the bishop doesn't have any extra pressure and white hasn't weakened himself. And castle. Now rook e1 is an idea. And things are getting very serious here because, let me just see here. Castles, queen g6. Was there any option to queen g6? Oh yeah, okay, so the c-pawn has to be protected, and black plays this awkward move. Here's a cute line, and this is the last line I'll show because I'm just showing you the opening. You might ask, why can't he do that? Threatening checkmate. And the idea is this move, attacking here, And really the only decent thing to do against that is to play bishop here, because otherwise there's this problem with the bishop coming to h5, followed by bishop f7 or knight f7. So he pretty much has to play there, and then I think bishop h5 anyway. Now the queen has to go here. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. And now you simply take it. Queen has to take back. Rook e1, and it's kind of all over. Because the queen has no squares. You notice the queen just can't really go anywhere, so it tries going there, but then there's this cute little move. And that's why I wanted to show this variation. It's such a nice, fun little variation. If the queen goes to f5, by the way, bishop g4 is too strong. So anyway, check, and there goes the queen. So anyway, it's fun. So that's as far as I'll go with this game. It's really not worth showing. White just kind of bowled black over, as you can imagine. I could show you more, but it takes quite a bit of time. So let's go back and look around. What game is this? That's a good question. It's Kudrin Khmelnytsky. Khmelnytsky is spelled Melnitsky. He wrote a book on sort of a beginner's or kind of an exercise book for sort of middling kind of players. Very, very good book. Sergei Kudrin was in a lot of U.S. championships and is still pretty active, I think. This game is from 1995. It goes back a little bit, but I thought it was a good illustration of what happens after knight b6. I think one of the morals of the story, though, is you can go ahead and play knight b6, and you're not doomed by any means. It's just that you really better know what you're doing. And actually, you may not want to play it against 2,600 players. Not that I know what you should play against 2,600 players, but yeah, it's kind of a cool game. Discombobulate. Maybe that's a Midwest. I grew up in the Midwest. It may be a Midwest term. All right, we have, yeah, okay, so let me look at the chat here. Here's a couple of questions. That's great. Why can't I scroll up? I got something earlier. I hate it when this happens. The first question I have is, as you know, I'm just starting out from Yannick Gazarian, and I had earlier questions. Does anybody know the tricks to scrolling up on... I normally just have a scroll bar. Okay, I'll use the scroll button. That does it. Okay, so I had one before that. Why have the queen b6 variations of the mainline Tarrasch gone out of fashion? Everybody plays queen c7 these days. In my Play the French, and I will get to Jan's question, in my Play the French book, I talked about queen b6. My first volumes, I suggested queen b6. It was still a respectable opening at the time. And a lot of people played it. In fact, a lot of people played it pretty much straight out of my book. The question is, instead of playing the modern line, which goes like this, well, how about playing queen b6 first? Or even you can play queen b6 a little later, but the traditional order is to play it right now. If nothing else, that stops knight b3 from ever being any good, which it might be if the pawn was there. Okay, and white plays here defending the center, and it's well known that this check really doesn't equalize. White's still better here. So what black has always done is this move, attacking the center, and white usually takes, and black usually castles. Now, okay, so white usually castles, and black plays bishop d6 usually. And what I wanted to say about this, well, a couple things. Let me see. In my book, I talk about this whole variation. One thing that one reason that people don't play this line is because they don't necessarily want to play here, although that's a well-known gambit and it's very complicated. Ullman used to play this as black, and he drew a bunch of games, but he didn't really win them. Maybe he won one of them. So that's complicated. So what happened is a lot of people started playing this move. I'd say that's the move that drove queen b6 out of business. But I don't really think it should have. The idea is you're going to play bishop f4 now, but this is not. This is defended over here. Now there's two things about this, as I point out in my book. Now it'd be kind of silly to play this move in a way, because now you've got the normal queen c7 line, but b3 is already in, and then you'd think that'd be good for white. But as I show in the book, that's not so clear whether that's a very useful move. So that's one way you can still play queen b6. The other thing you can do is allow this to happen. I thought this was this ingenious plan, but as I say in my book, I ended up looking it up, and there's some guy that's played this about 6 or 7 times, a German player, whose name I can't remember right offhand. And it's kind of an interesting move. It stops rook c1. It sort of has this idea sometimes, putting pressure here if this knight strays. And it has this idea, sort of trapping the bishop, or not allowing queen c2, try to get rid of white's bishop. I think this is a playable line. It's actually kind of fascinating. And you can always just develop like you do in other variations. You can play a5. So I think queen b6 is still playable. It turns out that this is pretty depressing. There's many ways to play this, and it's in my books. This looks like a good move, attacking this, but it turns out that white can just go back again. And I just think white's slightly better in all these positions. If you go way back, there's a bunch of lines where black plays something like this, and here forking. But this has all been worked out in tremendous detail, and white just seems to end up being better in this kind of position, for example. And you just have to take my word for that. So I hope that kind of answers that question about why not queen b6. Because people thought this was an inevitable position, and they thought that this was pretty much inevitable. And this position's just simply positionally better for white, because black doesn't get his usual tactics that he does when the queen's there, or even the usual tactics when his queen's there. Just this specific position, you can't really get play going against the f2 square. And so white really just has the advantage of this backward pawn on the open file, and the d4 pawn isn't very weak here. That's a little simplified. Oh, this move g3 is interesting too after knight takes. I forgot about that. Okay, so I guess that covers that. Let me scroll down now and see what's going on. Oh, I can't. For some reason, the regular scroll bar isn't working. Okay, as you know, I'm just starting out. I do know that. I have been getting the Berlin defense. What do you recommend for a beginner to make that game more active? Wow, is that a question? Okay, so we've got an e4, e5 player. Just too many of those around these days, and we're talking about being white, I guess. I've been getting. Okay, so the question is, here's the Ruy Lopez, and she's been getting this move, knight f6, and we've talked about this a little bit in the, your brother just told you hi, by the way, not just told you a little while ago, I guess. Okay, and the question is, how do you make this more interesting? The main line is, everybody, we've talked about this before, the main line is this endgame, which really, I agree, is not really appropriate for a beginning out player. It's not very interesting, and you don't learn much. This famous endgame. It's called the Berlin endgame, or the Berlin nightmare or something, the Berlin Wall. And the Berlin Wall endgame, and it's depressing everybody pretty much. So what all my students just play d3, and then they break open the position later. So this is the way that everybody I know plays it, and most of the top players play that too, although some of them just they don't mind a drawing position because they're playing a 2800 player or something, so they're willing to allow black to take this, and they're hoping they can maybe dig up some chances anyway. So what you do here is you just play usual Ruy Lopez moves. You can castle if you want to. You can play, let me just show you some lines maybe. This is a good answer actually. And you can play with h3, you can play c3. Sometimes stuff like this happens. Maybe that's out there sometime. You can also take on that square. Some people do that. And a good plan here, well, there's actually several ways to play this, but one of the plans that's sort of interesting is putting the knight there, putting the rook over, and then swinging the knight over here. That's called the Steinitz maneuver. And it's the sort of thing you can do. But you have to kind of look this up, and maybe you can even ask me a question on the via email, and I can go into more detail. But that's really the answer. For me, the way to stay in the game is play that. There's also something called the Worrall. This is a version of the Worrall where we defend this. Usually that happens after a6, but where you simply defend it that way and you castle, and you might even try playing the rook after you castle to d1 and break through with d4, or c3 and d4, for example. Okay, so that's a start. Let me see. You were going to talk about queen b6 in the Tarrasch. I did. Thank you very much. I just hadn't scrolled down. Now what do we have? Who's the rudest grandmaster you've ever met? Is that the next question? I am so sorry about this scrolling business. I don't know why I'm having this problem. Okay. I hope that's the last question, which is who's the rudest grandmaster you've ever met. If you don't want to give us a name, just give us a story. Boy, a lot of rude grandmasters. There's ones I've seen be rude to people in horrible ways. If you want some famous names, Korchnoi has just been awful. he's also just full of nonsense. If you read anything that Korchnoi said, you can take it with a grain of salt. Maybe not about chess, but about anything else. Who's the rudest? Trying to think of famous players who are famously rude. I guess Najdorf was not a particularly nice person in person. Kind of insulted a lot of people. I guess I'm willing to say that because everyone says it, even though he died recently, and I love his book, The Stress of Chess. I think Walter Brown was quite rude often. Just that's the way he was, and a lot of people forgave him that. The nicest grandmaster, well, that's tough. I think there's a lot of great, nice grandmasters. Just a whole bunch of them. Just example. I mean, everybody liked Peter Lecco, for example, and everybody likes Lev Aronian, as far as I can make out. Always smiling and very kind of gentle. I think gentle grandmasters are nice because you do have to be pretty aggressive and pretty feisty and competitive, and probably have a lot of pent-up aggression to be a top grandmaster. So of the top guys, those guys are, I think, particularly nice. Of say a lot of the American grandmasters are just great. The ones that I grew up with, and I haven't been around the kids that much. They all seem fine. I interviewed a lot of these kids, including Caruana, for example, but also including some of the up-and-comers like Daniel Naroditsky and Robson, and they all seem pretty nice. In my generation, I think you get some just very nice people: Nick DeFermian and Jack Peters and Larry Christensen. A little crazy sometimes, very, very nice, and he's featured on ICC. I mean, they're all fun to talk to. I got a whole bunch of John Fedorowicz is a gem. So a long list. I think most chess players are really nice. I think sometimes they're a little eccentric or very eccentric, but most of them are pretty generous people, I think, and pretty interesting people. So good question. I'm sure I could think of more rude ones. There have been plenty of rude incidents in my time, but partly that's just because it's a high-pressure game. It's a little like sports, athletics. People do funny things under pressure. Interesting question. Hey, you guys can throw something in there. If I'm willing to say something publicly, you should be able to throw something about someone you think was rude or horrible. Okay, I'm still on the nicest on the comments. Have I missed anything else? I did talk about Queen B6 in the Tarrasch. Okay, cool. Okay, having done that then, since we're in a little bit of a pause with the questions, let me go to the next thing I was going to say. I want to get some of these general questions in. A long question, which is one that I've been asked quite a bit, and I maybe don't have a great answer for, but not on the show. Over the years by students I've been asked. It says, I'm an expert level player. I've been an expert level player for the last 20 years. Of late, I like to play the classical Dutch, but via the E6-2 F5 move order. So what he's saying is he likes to play, for example, if knight F3, F5, or if C4, F5. That's the classical Dutch. It's the one with, C4, F5. That's what he likes to play. He likes to play the Dutch. In order to avoid aggressive pet lines white might play, and let me just explain what I think that is. I think the aggressive lines he's trying to avoid with the Dutch, it could be several, but I think they're either just knight C3, which I've played a bunch, or bishop G5, which we talked about a couple times on this show, or maybe even the Staunton Gambit, although I don't know if anybody's that afraid of the Staunton Gambit, but it is an aggressive line, and it might be something that Black doesn't want to play against. So that's what he's talking about. So let me continue the quote. My problem is that some very good master level players in my area may open 1d4, but as I have played this so well, after 1d4 e6, they are fully capable of playing 2e4. Okay. There. So then he says, I've tried playing the French, but frankly they play it better than me. The French is d5. My choice against 1e4 is some aggressive Scandinavian lines. It's just kind of funny. I'm not sure how aggressive, if you can make the Scandinavian if white plays carefully, but at any rate, I don't think of it as an aggressive defense. I think of it as being sort of like the Caro-Kann or something very, very solid. But if white plays aggressively, there's some aggressive lines. Also, lower rated players sometimes play the exchange French, and I need to beat these guys, or the advanced French. These circumvent the Rubinstein variation that I'm fairly comfortable with, and we've talked about the Rubinstein. So what he's saying is his opponents either play this or take, and don't allow him to play, for example, this kind of thing, which he is happy with as Black. So he doesn't want to play the French, basically. Um, okay, so you get this far, and he doesn't want to play the French, so what's he going to do? My question, what else to do? I've tried the Sicilian, he says, with c5, but do not really want to wade into theoretical waters after knight f3, which is the open Sicilian, right? Uh, and d5 is very good for white. I might as well just say right now, I think d5 is incredibly good for white. It's a real problem. So you couldn't get the Sicilian even if you wanted to without allowing something that's just so hard to play for black. This is the Franco Benoni. Not Franco Benoni. Franco English? Franco something. What is this? I think it's got a name like that anyway. And there's actually been a couple pamphlets trying to justify this as black, but after this, usually black plays these moves. And you can play d6 moves. You can take and play d6. You can try these things, but all of them are good for white and hard to play for black. And you don't get. I just don't think you'd be real happy with that. So that's another reason not to play that. So to continue, he said, I considered b6, but there we go. But from your series on the Owen English, realize that against e4 it's just not good. Yeah, I tend to think it's not that great, but it's maybe, it's something you can do. We'll talk about that. One local IM even plays this himself. Yeah, around here in San Diego, there's a bunch of people who play b6 because Cyrus Lactawala wrote a book on it, so you see it all the time. But he can get away with it as he is so good. So what do you recommend after d6, e4? Well, you pretty much covered the possibilities. The funny thing is I get this from French players because what happens is I get this question. They play e6 because they're hoping for e4 so they can play d5. That's really pretty common idea. But then what they ask me, of course, is that they're worried about what you aren't worried about, which is c4 or knight f3. That's what they're asking about. And of course, I have to give them ideas. For example, against c4, you can play the English defense, which is very interesting and kind of fun. I've got some students that play that. You can play a variation of the Bogo defense, Bogo Indian, or you can just go back into regular defenses, like the Nimzo Indian if he plays knight c3, or the Queen's Indian, or the Benoni, or the Bogo, or depending what white plays, whether he plays knight f3 or knight c3. So you got plenty of choices after e6 if you do want to play the French. This is tougher. I mean, think about it this way. How many French defense players stop at this point and start thinking about what to do? This is not. So I would recommend probably just bite the bullet and learn some French lines. The advance is very easy to play against. And grandmasters for years and years and years have been beating other grandmasters in that position as black. And of course, they lose to them too sometimes, and they draw them. But it's just a game. Every piece is left on the board. The nice thing about the exchange French is usually the player who tries to exchange rooks on the file it doesn't work, because what really helps in the French exchange variation is to push your your flank pawns and support them with rooks. So there's no easy way to exchange a bunch of rooks off in this position because black just simply won't do it. So I mean, in fact, I've got something coming up on the exchange French because I wanted to finish the little analysis I was doing of the exchange French. We still have to cover this. I'll probably do it next time. I can see I'm not going to get to it, but the last line I didn't cover was this kind of thing, either here and here or bishop d6. And I wanted to show you this idea. There's other ideas which I think I've already showed you, but I wanted to show you that, which can be a gambit when they take that. Judith Polgar played this, and just an interesting line. You can get there this way too if you want. If you want to make it really unbalanced already, if they don't play c4, it's already unbalanced because you don't put a knight on f6. And if they play c4, this is an interesting way to play. Not the only way at all, but it's one of the interesting ways to play. Okay, so that's what I would say, is you probably should go into French. However, as I say, Cyrus Lactawala wrote a whole book on this, and Christian Bauer wrote another book some years ago, Play 1b6 or something like that, on the same thing. So there have been a couple books by very strong players about how to play the Owen. So you can work on this and probably get a playable game. I mean, it can't be that horrible. It must be something where there must be lines where you can just get your pieces out. And I just don't like it much as black, but I think that if against lower players, we're talking about playing against lower players here, obviously, because otherwise, why would you be scared of playing the Dutch, right? You just play it anyway. You don't worry about all these sidelines, right? So you also want to play, so you want something dynamic. And this is at least very double-edged and dynamic. Nothing's been exchanged off. But I would just say you need to probably study this. I hope the sound's coming in now because I'm having trouble with my headset here. I guess that's what I'd say. Sort of a long answer to that. I got a question about. Let me see what the next question was. Radio interview. Um, okay, so let's see questions here first. Can you talk about the basic plans behind the Scandinavian Queen D6 and the Leningrad Dutch? They're not particularly related, but sure, absolutely. I'm playing my first tournament for 6 years. I was rated 1500 and probably about the same right now. Any tips for what to do the night before the tournament? Well, most people say don't stuff your head with things the night before the tournament. If you're going to do anything for an hour or two, it would be tactical exercises as opposed to studying openings or something. Nothing that you really want to memorize, just something that might get you in the mood to play chess. That's the normal advice. I don't know how many people actually follow it, but that's the advice. What do you recommend for a 1500 rating player to do most to improve his rating? Play chess, obviously, you have to do that. Watch videos or solve tactics. I've become less and less of a solve tactics. I mean, I think it's good. It has to be good to do that, but I tend to think the tactics you should learn should be through the structures you play in your openings, and as you play more and more openings, you'll cover more and more structures. And we've talked about visualization exercises, which is sort of like, but it's not like solving tactics as much as it is like learning how to visualize and calculate. Watching videos is fine. I think the deal with watching videos is if you're the kind of player who's really old-fashioned and likes books and doesn't really like visual learning, of course you won't. There's really no reason to watch videos. There's plenty of books and there's plenty of online material too that isn't video oriented that you can use. So, but if you enjoy videos and learn from them, I think they're great. They're just fantastic. Especially at 1500, I think you'll find that you get a lot of information really quickly watching videos. And some people, one great thing about videos is they keep with chess. I mean, sometimes when people are told to read books or study moves, they get bored with it and they just give up or don't enjoy it. So really, the best studying is studying you enjoy, if at all possible, or at least you don't hate it. It's kind of like music. I remember doing scales all the time, and I know there are people that like scales because they're sort of Zen-like people, but I never really did. So, but if you can find things that keep you interested and are kind of fun, that's what you should study. And as you experiment with different kinds of studying, that's what you'll figure out. Best way to do doubled pawns, but I got something else first. Oh yeah, can you? Yeah, okay, let's see this. What is the best way to benefit from having doubled pawns? Is there some good strategies or usually bad? Specifically doubled pawns on B or F files, usually when recapturing a pinned knight. Wow. Yeah, basically the rule, I mean, there should almost be no rules. Doubled pawns are now in almost every single opening, everything that the top players play. They just aren't feared, especially early in the game. I would say doubled pawns are like a lot of weaknesses or a lot of things that are a matter of principle, which is the later the game gets and the more simplified it gets, the more those doubled pawns can hurt you. But even in the middle game, even early on in the game, the things that the doubled pawns you don't really want are isolated doubled pawns in most cases. That's what'll hurt you more than anything else. And let me show you what I mean by that. Let me make some isolated doubled pawns here. It's going to be kind of silly, but okay, here we go. Great here. What am I going to do for an isolated double pawn? I'm going to just have some sort of thing where black plays for, let's say, e5 or something, and white plays. Whoops, already lost that. Okay, I'm going to do something here, something random. Make some moves. And white makes moves, and black plays for e5, let's say, something like that. And that's all fine, but then suddenly white gets some kind of pressure on the center, and black makes the mistake of running over here or something, and runs into, is it black's move? Oh, let's make it black's move. And black does something in the center and allows that kind of thing. These are very, very dangerous. These are hard to play with. I think f-pawns are the worst because they're usually close to the king, and you have outposts right in front of them. And the same thing on the queen side. You really just don't want isolated doubled pawns. I mean, if you look at, that was probably the worst example I've ever given on this show, I think. If you have, for example, I don't know, let's just look at isolated doubled queen side pawns for a second. Something like this, and then let's just say that white ends up really making them doubled like that, and doubled and isolated, and that's the problem. If they're doubled and isolated, that can be a real trouble in front of those pawns because you have outposts in front of it and you have an open file against them. Doubled pawns in other positions, like say, almost any opening has a variation with doubled pawns where they're either completely harmless or they're actually good. So doubled pawns by themselves are not weaknesses. I mean, you just can't look at it that way. The famous one is, of course, the Ruy Lopez, where at least the doubled pawns are a bit of a problem because you captured away from the center. If you could have gotten away with capturing this way, you'd have preferred to. If white had to play slowly here and black was able to just set up with this or even d5 at some point, then usually that's considered fine for black. You want to capture towards the center with most doubled pawns, but capturing away from the center is increasingly popular. So as long as the pawns are bunched up in some way, as long as the pawns have coordination with each other, that tends to be fine. You know, it's actually you can take just about any opening in the world and show some sort of doubled pawn thing, and it'll be the same answer every time pretty much. I mean, this kind of thing where you take this way, there you go on your G file. That's fine because the pawns are all bunched up and they're controlling a lot of squares and they're supporting each other. So that kind of doubled pawn tends to be just fine. Whereas this one, if you capture away from the center, there's kind of a bad doubled pawn because this one isn't connected with that one. So it's not supporting this and it's not supporting a central square anyway. You've just gotten rid of one of your supports in the center. Now that doesn't mean you don't take that way a lot. I mean, you can still take, you can make these sort of anti-positional moves, supposedly anti-positional moves, all the time in chess. I think the first thing I said is the most important, which is you don't want to get doubled pawns way late in the game. You want to get them early because you can always resolve them dynamically in some way or use them to win the game with. So, I mean, just to show you sort of how you paradoxically might take, you know, the other with the away from the center. This is a variation that a lot of people have played over the years, and something like let me see, whose move is it? Black's move. Let's just say here and here. This kind of thing. Knight here attacking this, and actually I want to make it a little more accurate. Let me make a reasonable move here. Let's go here for crying out loud. Okay, and then this kind of thing where you attack there, and then black goes like this, and he's threatening to win a piece, and so white moves the pawn somewhere, and you take that way. That's fine. And even if the pawn is back there, you often take that way to attack with. For example, here, let's say black makes some slow moves, and white goes here, and black makes another slow move or something. And when he takes that way, a lot of times it's better to take this way because you have that open F file. So it all depends on the position. There's plenty of ways to get doubled pawns that are perfectly good. So not the greatest answer of all time, but you get the idea. So really doubled pawns are to be, isolated doubled pawns are very dangerous if they're both isolated, and also the other thing to remember is that the later in the game, the more isolated doubled pawns can be a problem, whereas early in the game they tend not to be a major issue. The best way to benefit, that's too general a question because it's different in every single position. I guess the best way to benefit from most doubled pawns is try to advance your center because the doubled pawns protect your center. Is it usually bad to have doubled pawns? No, not at all. Not at all. Double pawns on the B or F files. Okay, well, I give you a start for that, and we can talk about it. Capturing back on getting doubled F pawns when nothing else is going on is very, very common and usually fine. Let me just see if I can get a better example here. What's a good example of doubled F pawns that really don't give you any problems? You think about well, something like, there was a game I was going to show today. Actually, this is a good point. Here's a game. A question I got a question about a game with this. Maybe I should answer other questions first. Oh, game plans, I should do that. That's only fair. Game plans behind the Scandinavian. I'll get back to doubled pawns. And the Leningrad Dutch. Gatakowski. Oh, Gatakowski's pretty nice, yes. He's a good guy. All right. We have Scandinavian with queen d6. That's this. It's hard to generalize too much. Now remember, everybody, I keep giving you this idea of playing there, not playing knight c3, and playing so you can play c4 if you need to. I still think that's a great system. And now instead of going queen a5, the traditional move, or queen d8, which has been played a bunch recently, he goes queen d6. That's a huge book by Michael Meltz, second volume of that too, on this variation. Kind of got me kind of interested in it. And what are the plans? Well, in most of these things you play c6 very early. Let's play knight f6 first, but I mean c6 is usually the move you're after. And the plan very often, because man, there's a variety of plans. One plan is just you're getting your pieces out, aren't you? I mean, you've got some pieces out and you have an open file, and there's not a pawn protecting that pawn, so you can bring a rook over to put more pressure on it. More importantly, you're covering f4. So if you would put that queen somewhere else, let's go back. If you put that queen here or something, and you had a similar position, you'd always have to worry about this move, and I'm not sure if you would play c6 here, but you might. You always have to worry about that aggressive move covering good squares in the center. Whereas if you got the queen on d6, you can't do that. Another weird idea of the queen on d6 is that it can go to b4 sometimes. In other words, maybe white does get all jazzed up about playing for bishop f4, so he really prepares it like that, which is not a bad move, by the way. And black, I don't know, develops or something. It's often true, and I'll probably get it completely wrong, but it's often true that this move, queen b4, is not a bad move. It kind of goes back to the pinning the knight idea, and it also has a little tempo gainer. So this queen b4 move is played quite a bit. Maybe not after bishop f5. That may have been my usual bad example, but I think you get the idea. Queen b4 is a tactical idea. In fact, sometimes white even plays a3 just to stop it. Maybe a better example would have been if white had made a few slower moves, castled, and then played for bishop f4. Then you'll find black going queen b4 a lot rather than retreating and being passive. What else is there with queen d6? Yeah, so stopping bishop f4, and then the idea is you just blockade at some point or another. You just simply blockade. This helps blockade the advance of the d pawn, which is white's main break here. So and a lot of people like playing this way. I'm not real sure if that's the best way to play with bishop g4. People like to play that way. So a basic setup would be something like this. Make sure you get castled. Maybe that knight's moved already because you're worried about that move. So you might have knight d7 in already. Put a rook on d8 because it's on an open file and you're doubling with the queen on d6. Okay, so game plans with Leningrad Dutch. Game plans with the Leningrad Dutch. Well, let's just look at the Leningrad Dutch, and I'm not going to show any fancy things against it, where white plays h4, h5 or anything. Okay, very typical anti-Dutch philosophy is this. Okay, what's he trying to do with Leningrad Dutch? Well, for one thing, in the Dutch defense, you very seldom get your bishop on this great diagonal. So it's kind of like a King's Indian. And the other idea is this pawn on the fact that it's a Dutch means you have extra control over that square. So it's very much like a King's Indian. And as in a King's Indian, one of the main ideas, not always, but one of the main ideas is to play for e5. You can also play c5 sometimes, and you can just wait on the e5 idea. So in the old days, black always used to play this with the idea of playing e5 or c6. c6 was very popular. But even c6 had the idea of playing e5 at some point. For example, very early on, you might play a move like that. And I'm sorry, but he usually takes en passant, because if he doesn't, you've got these wonderful pawns moving forward. So I would say e5 is almost always the first plan, even though black ends up playing other plans. And as time went on, black started playing this move to play e5 directly. This became a really popular line. In fact, it became the main line for quite a while. And there's many, many answers and many, many things you can do. But the idea is very primitive. Just play e5. Now, it turns out, of course, you don't usually play e5 right away because white's done something that makes it difficult to do that. So you end up playing, you wait a little. You might play moves like a5 and knight a6 like Larson used to play. c6 is a good move. Knight a6 followed by knight c7. Basically, you just get your pieces out, cover a lot of central squares. That's the idea of the c6 moves, and then play for e5. Or sometimes the idea of queen e8 is to play h6, g5, and queen h5. So I would say those are the basic ideas of the Leningrad Dutch. And as I say, there's basically three ways to play it in this position. I'm talking about the main line now. If white plays b3 ideas, then it's usually the same thing. It's usually the same idea. You're still playing for, even if you play a slow move like this after b3, you're usually going to end up playing for e5 one way or another. So I hope that sort of answers that. What are some other plans? Well, sometimes you just do things on the queen side like Larson used to do. And you just kind of wait for white. White has no particular aggressive plan here that's that good. The minute white's threatening to play e4, you have a tendency to play knight e4. For example, let's say I play queen here, threatening e5, and white plays rook here. Then I think knight here is the traditional move anyway. And then it turns out there's some queen f7 trick. Now how does this go? I don't understand why this isn't just good. Maybe it is good. Maybe I've messed it up. Yeah, I have, sorry. So it can't be that move immediately. Huh. Well, here I guess you play e5. So the question is, what is that line where he gets queen f7 in? Must be an h6. Oh, queen f7 is with tempo on that square. That's right, and he's on f2. So maybe it is. Maybe it is here immediately. No. Ah, my fault. Someone can help me with this. But anyway, the idea is to play knight e4 early, and then if he takes, there's this idea of queen here attacking these ways. And that's an old idea. I'm not sure why you can't just play e5 either, but we'll not worry about that. Okay, other questions. I've been playing tips, and then I got something else. Con Sicilian. How beneficial is it to play both e4, d4, knight f3, c4? Well, if you get all those moves in, it's great. Covers the center and does everything else in the world. Let me see if I've missed something. Someone else was asking me something specific that I really thought I should answer. Well, maybe not. At what point should a developing player widen his repertoire? Early on, you should have a repertoire. It's just that you need to not go too fast. Shouldn't play everything. Okay, I've recently started playing e4. Don't know how to handle the Con Sicilian. Maybe I'll just throw that one in. I have a question for you. Ah, yes, San Diego Sun sometimes does that. I was just thinking of getting up to get the dogs, right? But but I see I've got some help with that. So, okay, where are we here? Okay, let me do the Con Sicilian question. That'll be fun to do the Con Sicilian question. And let me see. Here's the Con Sicilian. It's an open Sicilian. Yeah, I'm on a show. Very, very professional situation we've got here. So this is the Con Sicilian. It's an open Sicilian, and we've talked about it before, and we've even talked about some specifics. And I also mentioned the fact that I constantly lost Con Sicilians as black. One of my worst openings ever. I played it as my main Sicilian for years, so I could hardly ever recommend it just because I did so badly with it. But I think if you're a strong player of a certain kind and don't mind having not much space and being a little cramped, you can do well with it. Probably the most popular professional answer is Bishop d3, which has about 8 things that black can do. I would suggest, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're worried about the con at all, you play Bishop d3 because it's so safe. You're just going to castle. You've got your pieces out. You might play c4 later and you might just develop. But in any case, I'm getting some feedback here. In any case, it's the safest and easiest to play. You're not going to get checkmated. You're going to have it. No matter what he does, you're going to have a lot of development and you're going to have a lot of pieces out. Now against that, there's all kinds of ideas. One of them is just, okay, you start out with this, and that's not by far not the only move, but because if he plays here, you have queen a5 check, winning that, so that's a blunder. And white probably castles. And now you can just develop. You can just get your pieces out, but you can also play sort of a Sicilian setup, like a Scheveningen setup. So that's a fairly safe way, but then white against this can just play normally. He can just play normal moves, or he can play a setup like this. And a nice setup here is to play queen e2, b3, and bishop b2. That's a good attacking setup and pretty solid, pretty easy to play. Against, this is a popular line, to go over here and attack the knight, and then come back when the knight attacks you. So you come back to either e7, which happens, or here. Usually that follows knight f6 also, by the way. That's a popular line. b5 it became very popular as the years went on. It used to be thought to be just bad, but Peter Svidler plays b5. A lot of GMs play b5, so it can't be that bad, can it? The idea is get these moves in first before you decide where your knight's going, whether it's going there or there or there, and before you decide where your bishop's going. The idea is you want this move, these Sicilian-like moves, b5 and bishop b7 in. You might as well play them first. A very popular move is this. If you play, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned what the normal con move is, which is queen c7. That's even more normal against this. This is the original con variation. Is queen c7, stopping bishop f4 again, by the way, just like that Scandinavian thing we talked about, which would hit a weak dark square, and then developing. And there's many ways to develop after that. With for example, if white just develops here, you can play b5 with bishop b7, or you can just develop, and you can finally also play this. And this is an ancient main line. This position here has been played in thousands of games. And white has many ways to play this. The normal way is here, and then there's a bunch of gambits. And I played the black side of this for years, this exact position, actually. I also played without 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 queen c7, I played it with this move first. In other words, I played here, and they would play here, and I would play knight c6, and they would castle or something. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I played it. My fault. This kind of position. I would play with this and this kind of thing with the bishop here. Actually, I played those first and then knight f6. Sorry, getting a little confused here. What is the question? The question is what to play against it. I would say bishop d3. I would say bishop, just very solid. And just get your pieces out. Castle. You can always play queen e2. Against moves like this now, if you want to, you can just take. Very safe line. Now you can, by the way, they can take with the d pawn too. Just like that. And if they play here, just get your knight out. Play b3, bishop b2, queen e2. Really good development. Black has no pieces out, so at least you've got a development lead. Your center isn't that thrilling. Black has a central majority. Black can also take this way and try to play for the move e5. And in that case, you play knight d2, c4, castles, and maybe even f4 if you're feeling bold and if it doesn't give you too many weaknesses. Okay, so that's a quick setup of what you might do against the Khan. It's a big question because there's whole books on the Khan. Okay, there was a question on the French, and I don't know, would you recommend me any system against the French? Wow. Yeah, I get that question a lot too. Well, we've talked about things on this show a little bit, like different things to do. It's just a hard question. It depends what kind of player you are. If you're a serious player who likes to study a fair amount and plays a lot, I used to just play this. I just went right into main lines. I like them. I enjoy them, and that was my main way of playing. Maybe if you don't have that much time to study, you might want to play something a little slower. I wouldn't really recommend this because the counterattack is so immediate. You have to really know what you're doing. In a way, you almost have to memorize more playing e5 than you do playing other moves. I wouldn't recommend the exchange because it's a very negative thing to do, and you tend to just lose the initiative, and pretty soon you stand worse, and you go, wait a minute, I played the exchange and I was white, and I'm already worse. And psychologically, it's a terrible opening, and he objectively, all it does is free black's bishop, and he equalizes immediately. I'm not a believer that white shouldn't play for some advantage in all openings, just because that causes black more problems. Even if black can eventually equalize, you want to give them more trouble. I'd say the most popular thing these days for people who don't play a ton is that move because it's fairly safe. Now, one little disadvantage of this move is that black has so many responses that you should learn. There's c5 is big, knight f6 is big, and there's also different ways of playing these moves once you've already played them. Knight c6 can be played, a6 can be played. Bishop e7 can be played. So you might have to learn a fair amount, but it's fairly safe. Your idea is to put a bishop here, maybe put a knight here, or maybe put a knight here and castle. You're just getting your pieces out. Maybe that's the simplest thing to play if you're just starting out, which it sounds like you are. Okay, Neji gives bishop d3 on the fifth move. Ah, there you go. Well, that's what John is saying, and an awful lot of people do. This is the traditional answer, actually, to the Khan, in a sense, the Grandmaster answer. But the main reason it's the answer is not because knight c3 isn't perfectly good, maybe even better, who knows, but it's because it's so much easier and safer to play that. You've eliminated possibility of really getting in trouble in the opening if you play that. But it's also a good move. There are a few USB mics that work well for your streams and videos that are reasonably affordable. Okay, this is a USB mic, and it's always been fine, so we'll have to have a problem. Maybe even last time we had a little difficulty, but I think traditionally the mic has worked perfectly well, so I'm not sure. This is a good mic. Now videos, I don't know what we're talking about. You mean video programs? I'm not sure. Anyway, thanks for the advice. We'll think about that, and you can also add to what you're saying so I understand it a little better. The mic actually is a good mic. It's something else technically that's not working well here. I think we've done fine in previous shows with this mic. And it's a standard mic that is used all over ICC. Will you please recommend a book against any book against the French? Wow. Well, the Neji book that he just mentioned. By the way, what John was saying was that this move, bishop d3, was in the Parmesan, whatever his name is. I don't know about the pronunciation of that. Parmesan, I think it is. Neji book on Plane 1e4. It's a several volume repertoire book on Plane 1e4, and he recommends Bishop d3 apparently. That's what John was trying to say. That's a great book. You could have your entire e4 repertoire based on that book, and you'd probably do pretty well actually. Although you'd have to study like crazy because he tends to play main lines. He tends to play very complicated lines. And against the French, that would be another book you could use. But of course, he goes into main lines, so it's a great book against the French, actually. It's a really good book, but you have to play main lines. And in the Winnower, you have to play right into the poison pawn variation and queen g4 and all this stuff. And against the classical, you have to play right into main classical lines, right into some of these main variations. So probably not a good book depending on what level you're at. On a low level, there aren't that many books that are just specifically anti-French books. There's some old books on the Tarrasch, giving repertoires in the Tarrasch, and I'm trying to think. There's some good videos against the Tarrasch. Lawrence Trent has a repertoire with knight d2, although he does a lot of main lines too. If you want to avoid main lines, I'm just not sure. Okay, here's a book. There's a book by Denis Yevseev that recommends just playing this move and c3 against everything in the Tarrasch, pretty much everything. So in other words, if black plays here, you don't play e5, you just play here. And if black develops like that, you play this way, and you get isolated pawn positions. You just go like that, and you allow black to isolate this pawn here, that position. And if black checks, you actually come back again, it turns out. So that's this book on, what's it called? Anybody know? Fighting Against the French? 1e4, Fighting Against the French, something like that. He recommends playing the system against everything. So in other words, if the guy plays c5, you do the same thing. The other main move against the Tarrasch is c5. He just says go here. And then after that, go knight f3. And then if black goes here, you just go here. And anyway, it's an interesting book. That would be fun. Oh, you're a 2000 player. Well, it would still apply to a 2000 player. He's a strong player, so you could do that. It depends how much work you want to do. If you want to do a lot of work, I'd say just go right into the knight c3 lines and learn them and have fun with them. They're more fun. You get a lot of quick wins. And they have a lot. I mean, I had a great time with the knight c3 lines. Sam Collins also recommends that line in his book. I didn't realize that. Oh, yeah, because he's a c3 Sicilian player. So he's, in other words, Sam Collins plays this way and gets these isolated pawns anyway in these positions. So, for example, that can even happen with a French line. That can already happen where he's going to isolate that pawn. Or even in the main lines, he likes to have an isolated pawn. Oh, sorry, that's not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking d5. Excuse me. I'll get there. Yeah. So takes d5, and at some point, black's going to take that pawn. I mean, there's so many variations, but at some point, something like this happens, and you get that isolated pawn. So this is the sort of thing Collins plays anyway. He plays this kind of thing anyway, and then, hey, there's that queen d6 again, because it stops bishop f4. And a theme, it's our theme for the day. Anyway, this sort of thing. Well, what he's saying, what Collins is doing in the French is similar. He's saying, I'm going to play my favorite structure here against c5, for example. I'm going to end up getting the same kind of structure. I'm not going to fall for advancing this pawn ever. So I'm going to end up with something resembling, who knows, this and this and this and I don't know, b6 at some point. And there it is again, that isolated pawn structure. So it's consistent with the rest of his repertoire. Good, excellent point, especially about the Collins book. You might want to pick that up. It's a good repertoire book. Actually, I'm not sure if it's that great a repertoire. It's not my favorite, but it's playable. I think c3, your opponents are going to know c3 pretty well, and if they know it, it's hard to get anything going with c3 these days. Very, very hard. And okay, no more comments right here. We're well into the second hour. So I can't really show the next game I was going to show. I've got a game that someone sent me, which I think would be wonderfully instructive. And I guess we will do that next week. Thanks everybody coming on. I got some great comments. I probably missed a few of them, knowing me. But I'll try and I'll copy this chat, and if there's anything interesting, I'll try to get to it next week. So why do many coaches, we have an interesting one here. Why do so many coaches stress to play the sharp open games before playing closed positions? There's a dogma or there's some relevance? Well, yeah, I mean, there's definite relevance. I think real early on, up to, 13, 1400 or something like that, you really want to learn how to. You need to know how to hang on to your pieces when they're attacked, and you need to know how to attack other people's pieces, and you need to know how to checkmate. And so the open games, which really aren't very sharp, really, that's the problem with 1e4 these days, is you can't guarantee any kind of sharp game. Most of them aren't sharp in the long run because what happens, so every time you gambit these pawns or something, what happens is very soon all the pieces start coming off. So really, it's funny that they call these sharp games, or that they call, because they really aren't always sharp in the long run. But they're great to start out with because first of all, your opponents are going to be 1300 and also, so you're probably going to get a lot of crazy attacking positions with a lot of open lines, right? And this is a great opening. The Goring is one of the great examples of a wide open kind of position that leads to all kinds of tactics, or the Danish Gambit, or the Evans Gambit. So yeah, I do agree. I think it's great to get open positions when you start out. Now, as you go along, you'll find that D4 probably gives you more open positions than E4 does. You'll find that D4 is more. It tends to be more of an open if you play it a certain way. It's hard to get open positions that are not completely worked out. See, this is the problem. Let's say you go ahead and play what everybody was supposed to play in the old days, and you play a Joko piano. Two knights also can peter out very quickly if you try to open up the position. Sure, you can temporarily learn some tactics, but you don't win any games and you don't have very interesting games because people have it all memorized. But that's the old line, right? You've probably seen this kind of thing. This is this kind of thing where they say, oh, play this stuff, or maybe even play this, which is actually not that good. But and they say, see, you'll get all these open lines. Well, after a while they aren't. Everything's kind of blocked after a while, and there's a lot of simplification. So as a real weapon long term, I don't think any of these open games really do that much good. But when you're a kid, it's great. I mean, I agree. Starting out with open games is probably very, very useful because you have to protect your pieces and you have to protect your king. The kings get attacked, and pieces get attacked, and you got to put your pieces on open lines. Actually, anyway. Even this move is good these days, but for example, in a position like this, I don't know why I'm using this exact one, but it's a nice traditional open line position. Look, there are files. There are open files to work with for the rooks. The rooks have already open files. A lot of openings. You don't get an open file till way late in the game. So here you get a chance to get all your pieces out real quickly, real aggressively. Both sides can get all their pieces up and out. They don't have to worry about developing some problem piece. And that tends to be true of these open games that you're talking about, these sharp open games. Okay, I hope that's a halfway decent answer. It would also be a reason to play, for example, if you are an E4, E5 player, you really might want to think about playing something like a Schliemann or something, just because as black, because it opens a lot of lines and it teaches you how to play tactically. I'm not a big fan of the open lines theory. I just think it's only true when you're starting out, and then after that, you'll have enough tactics and enough experience in open positions just by playing any kind of openings. It's really just at the beginning. You need to really concentrate on not dropping pieces, and then having your pieces being attack and counterattack is very important. Okay, so maybe that's the last thing I'll answer. Thank you everybody for coming on. And am I getting some extra questions here? How many sub-A players know Joko piano theory? That's true. So maybe you play that and you get some interesting, fun games. It's not so much how to win, I don't think, that he's asking. He's asking about coaches. It's what do you want to learn? And it's a good learning opening. And I think you would agree with that. So what do you recommend? Something here. Here for black. HER. Anyway, thank you, everybody. I think I'm done with this now. Yeah, okay. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We've gone on a little over the normal time limit. I'm really glad so many of you came on to chat and asked questions on the chat, because those are the most fun. You can watch me stumble, for one thing, which is always fun. And for another thing, it's just fun for me, because it's something new and different that I haven't had a chance to look at already, so it's kind of more refreshing. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you next week.